Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
You can tell a lot about where a company is going by looking at where it's been. ConocoPhillips, Alaska's oil and gas company.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder with you on this 23rd of December. As always, we encourage you to visit our website for the very latest weather and forecast information for your community and village. You can look at the entire state at once by heading to arh.noaa.gov or weather.gov. You'll have to click on Alaska if you go that way, and that will take you to your nearest Weather Service office in Fairbanks, Juneau, or Anchorage that serves your area. The weather info line is open. You can dial up your forecast, and if you jot down the numbers you used the first time you call, you can use those numbers very easily and a lot faster the next time. That's a nice little service if you'd like to use the phone. Twitter.com, you'll find each Weather Service office, NWS Anchorage, NWS Juneau, and NWS Fairbanks on Twitter. You can get special messages on your phone or mobile device easily that way, as well as on Facebook under U.S. National Weather Service Alaska. Get a sneak peek at the forecast mid-afternoon by heading to YouTube. NWS Anchorage is the easy way to go, and then immediately following this broadcast on the Alaska Public side, you can go to alaskapublic.org and find the link on the right-hand side of your screen, or if you go to YouTube and search AKWX TV, you'll find the complete broadcast that you're watching right now and me saying that. If you watch that at the same time, it'll probably give you this really cool echoing effect. I'm not sure if that works, but try it out. Let me know. Here's a look at northern parts of Southeast, and you have a few areas around the Haynesboro and Lynn Canal shaded in with a watch. That's a winter storm watch, and starting tomorrow night into Wednesday night, there's a possibility for another 6 to 12 inches of snow in that area. It could come down hard and heavy there, so keep that in mind as you're making your plans. If that includes travel up and down the Klondike Highway and around the Taya Inlet, you'll need to keep that in mind as well. That will certainly impact travel. Again, that's Tuesday evening through Wednesday evening. Winter storm watch posted for northern parts of Southeast. Elsewhere, things are relatively quiet, at least on land, as stronger winds are possible across some parts of the Alaska Peninsula and out across South Central, with storms working through the region. We've got a frontal boundary that's working its way northward, and that will fall apart and then be replaced by another boundary that sets up here. You'll see that in the surface charts here in just a minute. But overall, the big weather maker is this area of low pressure. It's pretty broad, not terribly compact, but it's deep enough to get the wind moving a little bit across the central and western Aleutians here over the last couple days, and things seem to be slowly settling down. But again, it's an active weather player out there in the west, so we'll keep an eye on it. As you notice, there's a lot of moisture out ahead of that. That's probably creating periods of rain and snow across a large part of the eastern Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula today. We saw places like Cold Bay and Falls Pass reporting rain and snow earlier today. Across the west coast, relatively dry conditions, some pockets of occasional precipitation, but mostly dry weather coming off the continent. A look at all of Alaska, and you can see the southeast has had some breaks in the cloud cover today. Another round of cloud cover setting up to move in, and it's this surge of moisture here that would bring that opportunity for some accumulating snow later on Tuesday evening into Wednesday evening across northern parts of Southeast. For right now, it's cold and clear conditions settling up across most of the interior and even parts of South Central. The satellite picture at this point is not really doing it justice. We've got a sensor on the satellite that senses the temperature of the air. So we're not really using the visible side of the satellite picture this time. We're using kind of a thermometer to sense where the colder parts of the air are. And in one of the coldest areas is where the computer draws in the clouds and says that's probably what's going on. Well, in this case, we know that's not the complete story. You'll look at most of the mainland around Alaska and see kind of a milky white here. Sure, there's some clouds moving through, but you're going to have to watch for the movement and watch for areas that don't move, and that's most likely just a lot of cold air settling down into the valleys. What we'll have across a large part of south central and southeastern Alaska tonight, or the Copper River Basin, I should say, will be areas that are just cooling down fairly quickly. In many parts, and will probably drop below the 0 mark tonight in south central, maybe even the Copper River Basin, especially in the valleys there. But watch for areas across the Arctic slope, the eastern Brooks Range, even parts of the eastern interior. This is cloud cover, so keep your eye on this right here. This is certainly moving. Many areas areas across the Alaska Range, we're seeing some patchy cloud cover. A lot of what you're seeing across south central, the Kenai Peninsula, and southwest, and even in the interior, we're relatively clear conditions today, even though that's not what shows on the satellite picture this time. Today's weather map shows a cold front coming across the Arctic. That will sweep across the North Slope and the Beaufort Seacoast as we head into the next couple days. More than anything else, it will likely stir up the winds a lot, so some brisk wind conditions there across the eastern Beaufort Seacoast, and probably some pockets of snow showers and flurries as we go into the next 2 days or so. Out across the west, this is one of two frontal boundaries that's going to move across the Bering Sea and the North Pacific. As it does so, it's starting up the winds across the Alaska Peninsula and the eastern Aleutians. It's going to have to work through an area of high pressure across the west and central and the YK Delta area. It doesn't really want to move very much, so as that happens, this front, which is already pretty weak, is going to start to fall apart as it moves northward. Colder air is moving off the continent, though, and will swing across the eastern parts of the Gulf and work its way through southeast. Because of that, there's an opportunity for more clouds and some pockets of rain and snow, as you would expect for southeast. Some of that tonight. Places like Sitka could be looking at some light rain. High pressure just to the north, though, sitting very close to Dawson, will keep the sky relatively clear across a large part of the Yukon Valley, the Copper River Basin, maybe even the Alaska Range as well. That's one of those opportunities that if you're anywhere around Denali and can have an opportunity to see it, you should have a pretty good shot if you look at it at the right time of day. And folks in South Central usually know when that is in a weather situation like this. Tonight, across the eastern Aleutians, a frontal boundary will work across the eastern parts of the chain into the Alaska Peninsula. Low pressure just north of Dutch Harbor, Unalaska, and Atka will drop to about 986 millibars. So the winds will probably pick up a little bit here across the southern Bering. 976 millibars out across the western Bering. It's some pockets of rain and snow with that. Snow showers more likely around Nunivak Island and the YK Delta. The triple point part of this wave of low pressure will work into the eastern and central parts, or the western and central parts of the Gulf of Alaska. And this is really where the focus of the next storm is going to come there, especially if you're in southeast and watching for snow. You'll notice the front creeping across the Arctic coast, and as it does so, snow showers are likely in places like Kaktovik, Prudhoe Bay, Kaparik. Back across the west, a slightly drier sky and probably some colder winds pouring off the continent. And we saw a pretty wide temperature spread here across the northern parts of the Seward Peninsula and the Kotzebue Sound region. We'll look at those here in a minute. But depending on which way the wind is blowing and which direction your weather was coming from there, you saw a huge change in temperature. Again, we'll check on that in just a minute. Out across the west, kind of an odd shape of fronts out here across the Bering Sea in the North Pacific. This wave is trying to die at 979 millibars. The next wave is trying to work its way northward into the chain in the Alaska Peninsula, and a new piece of that has broken off and is focusing on the Gulf. Looks like some of the stronger winds will focus across the coastal sections around Prince William Sound, on the northern Gulf Coast, and across the east. The most active weather likely across the southeast with the greatest impacts to more people here. But we're also going to watch areas around Kodiak Island where you could see some snow accumulation as early as Monday night and Tuesday. And some of that will reach into places like Seward, maybe Homer, but for points northward, including Kenai, Soldotna, and farther northward Girdwood and Anchorage, it looks like a lot of the snow, at least for Tuesday anyway, probably won't make it that far north just yet. And you may see some snow showers, but the bulk of it is certainly going to stay to the south. And for the interior, pretty dry and clear night once again as we head into Tuesday night and Wednesday. Here's a look at Wednesday afternoon, and dry and clear conditions there for you. A frontal boundary across the Alaska Range. Snow showers still trying to creep their way into that drier flow across south central. Pockets of rain and snow across parts of coastal sections of the northern Gulf, and rain and snow across southeast with low pressure just south of Kodiak Island once again, and an opportunity for some snow there. Drier air still sitting just south of Nunivak Island, the driest of which is north of the region, the Norton Sound and places like Nome, so pretty cold stuff for you as the air is trying to flow off of the continent. And low pressure sitting west of Shemya will continue to stir up the winds a little bit and give more of the central and eastern parts of the chain rather southerly flow than anything else. Here's a look at temperatures now. Across southeast, we saw 30s and 40s across areas like Juneau at 38 degrees. Petersburg in the upper 30s, almost 40 degrees by late afternoon. Ketchikan, Annette, Craig, Klawock, all in the upper 30s. Sitka managed 41 this afternoon, snowing, and 34 in Yakutat today. Mid-20s around Prince William Sound from Cordova to Valdez out to Whittier, where it's rather blustery this afternoon. We saw some gusts around the region in the 40 and 50 mile an hour range. 25 in Seward, 24 in Homer, and Kenai was showing only 1 with 17 around Anchorage, 1 in Wasilla and close to Palmer, and 2 below at the Matanuska Glacier with 6 in Talkeetna. Further up the road toward Healy, it was only 0, with Fairbanks showing 4 degrees. Northway and Eagle were both sub-0 this afternoon, not by much though, certainly not the coldest days you've seen. And Fort Yukon was a 1 solitary temperature with Anaktuvuk Pass at 13 below. Bettles was 27 below with Ambler at 18 below. Atkasuk was 16 below with Barrow at 6 below. Prudhoe Bay and Deadhorse both showing temperatures anywhere from 10 to 15 below this afternoon, and 3 below in Kaktovik. 29 below in Kivalina, one of the colder temperatures that we could find on the map this afternoon. Kotzebue was 16 below, and 7 in Nome, that's 7 above. Notice the temperatures again here drastically different, and all of this seemed to be due to the temperatures or the wind directions varying in different locations. So if the wind was blowing off land, it was pretty cold. If it was blowing over the ice, it didn't seem to be quite as bad. 7 above again in Nome, with parts of Norton Sound in the single digits like Unalakleet. As you get out to Hooper Bay, temperatures were a little bit closer to 3. King Salmon and Dillingham both above 0 there, but still sub-freezing. 24 in Kodiak. Most of the Alaskan Peninsula was in the 30s. Port Heiden and Pilot Point a little bit on the cooler side compared to places like False Pass, Cold Bay, and Chignik at 34 degrees. 42 in Dutch Harbor, Unalaska. The Pribilofs were in the mid-30s this afternoon. And one of the warmer spots on the map today was Adak at 45 degrees. Temperatures there will likely dip into the mid-30s, with Southwest Alaska and Bristol Bay in the teens. Nunivak Island, you're looking at 15. St. Lawrence Island, closer to 10. 8 below expected in Nome tonight. The eastern parts of the Brooks Range, some of the coldest temperatures we should see. Around Arctic Village, 35 below. Anaktuvuk Pass, 25 below. And anywhere from 15 to 25 below across the Arctic coast. For parts of South Central, expect places like Anchorage to go to about 5 below in some of the eastern areas, a little bit closer to 0 on the west side, 26 in Kodiak, and for southeast, expect temps at or just above freezing, with the exceptions around Haines and Skagway, closer to 25. As you look farther north, temperatures tomorrow there won't fluctuate too much, but farther south from Sitka all the way out toward Petersburg and Wrangell, look for areas there to maybe work up toward the 40-degree mark. 32 in Kodiak. South Central is expecting temperatures in the single digits and teens tomorrow, with the interior, including Fairbanks, as cold as 15 to 20 below. Fort Yukon looking at 26 below. The Arctic coast anywhere from 5 to 10 below. Nome's looking at 8 above, with the YK Delta and Southwest Alaska in the teens and 20s. Dutch Harbor 43, and St. Paul looking at 38. IFR conditions should be expected east of the low that's moving through the Gulf tomorrow, across Kodiak Island and across parts of the YK Delta, along Nunivak Island, St. Matthew Island waters, and parts of the Pribilofs, with a central and eastern chain also expecting a wide swath of IFR conditions, some of that across the eastern Beaufort Seacoast as well. Here are your pass conditions as we check on Anaktuvuk and Adigan Pass. Expect VFR for both areas there. Lake Clark will likely lean over toward MVFR as we go through the day. Merrill Pass, VFR conditions. Rainy Pass and Windy Pass should both be visual flight rule throughout your Tuesday. Isabel Pass expected to be VFR. Same goes for Mentasta Pass, and Tanita Pass should be VFR, with Portage Pass leaning over toward MVFR through your Tuesday, and Chilkoot and White Pass should also go MVFR. Your freezing levels now shows that warmer air trying to nudge its way back into the Bering Sea. It's not going to do so very effectively or efficiently. In the meantime, the upper level freezing lines there are starting to creep up toward the Pribilofs at 2,000 feet, and you start to get some indication of a little overrunning here across northern parts of the Gulf. A lot of this, though, should remain cold enough for all snow across Kodiak Island, and again for most of southeast we're talking about rain and snow at times. Pardon me. As you look out to the west, that frontal boundary is also going to focus an opportunity for some icing there. Most of that should be light to isolated moderate, and mainly below 10,000 feet across parts of southern sections of southeast, but above 1,000 feet there, and also across Kodiak Island. High pressure will continue across the west. That upside down U pattern, that's that omega blocking system that keeps most of the active weather on either side of the high pressure pattern there, west of the Aleutians, and mainly on the northern and eastern side of the Beaufort Seacoast. The active weather is focusing on this stream here, and you can see again that's pointed right at southeast, within a 110 jet stream right there in the northern parts of southeast. Winds remain pretty light. If you look carefully, you can kind of detect a trough crossing over the Alaska mainland there at 9,000 feet. Winds again anywhere from 15 to about 20 knots. The stronger flow comes in from the south and west. That's about 50 to 55 knots are coming into southeast, and you can see that southerly flow working across the Bering Sea anywhere from 20 to 25 knots. A similar pattern here. The winds are a little more disorganized and light across the mainland at 3,000 feet. Southwesterlies coming in at 25 to 50 knots. And here's our pattern out across the west with that dominant low overhead. Winds mainly from the south and southeast, about 30 to 40 knots or so. Turbulence, yeah, sure there is some across the northern parts of the Gulf, mainly below 5,000 feet and across parts of southeast and the coastal sections. As you get out toward the eastern Aleutians, that could drop to about 6,000 feet or so. And across the northern parts of the Bering Sea, that should also be about 4,000 to 6,000 feet around St. Lawrence Island and mainly north of Nunivak Island. That's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back in just a few minutes with your marine weather. Stay tuned.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Harry Keeling, and on behalf of the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation and Alaska Public Media, welcome to Hangar Flying. This evening, our guest is Dr. Petra Illig, Senior Aviation Medical Examiner. I've known and been a friend of Petra's for many years. Many of you know Dr. Illig and her dedication to flying, flight medicine, and flight safety. She's a graduate of the University of Washington Medical School, but I think when she was getting ready to graduate from med school, she was probably more worried about getting her pilot's license. I'll let her tell that story. She's had a really broad and impressive career. She was an emergency room doc for 15 years, worked flight medicine with Delta, and came to Alaska in 2001 and opened up her own flight medicine practice. Petra, it's a real pleasure to welcome you back to Hangar Flying.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Illig has agreed to be on the next couple of shows, and during that time she'll be discussing the reason for flight physicals, the role of the flight doc, what happens when medical problems develop, and finally the importance of good health and hygiene. So Petra, let's start with the broad question. Why even have flight physicals?
Well, it's a human-machine interface. Back in the early days of aviation, specifically in World War I, it was found that more pilots died due to human factors causes rather than enemy fire. And so it was realized that there needed to be certain medical criteria developed so that people could meet the requirements, physical and mental health requirements, in order to safely operate an aircraft in a continuously changing environment.
I noticed your title is Senior Aviation Medical Examiner. What does that specification senior entail?
Just means that we have been authorized by the FAA to do Class 1 flight physicals. When an AME, when a physician first wants to become an aviation medical examiner, they have to take a course at Oklahoma City. It's about a 3-day course. And then they're designated in their local area to do flight physicals. But for the first couple of years and the first couple of hundred flight physicals, they're restricted from doing Class 1s. I think the FAA wants us to make our mistakes, our early learning mistakes, with Class 3s and Class 2s. And then we get vetted for doing Class 1s, and that's just what senior means.
In the broader sense, what is the role of the AME?
Well, I believe it's an intermediary between the FAA and the pilot. The FAA doesn't do flight physicals other than on their own employees, for air traffic control personnel, for example. But we're there to evaluate the pilot according to the FAA criteria for certification of the various levels, Class 1 through 3. But I personally believe that we're there also to advocate for the pilot. Pilots come into the exam room at the AME's office with fear and trepidation. And they frequently have a feeling that they don't want to disclose too much, just enough, to walk out with a certificate. And they sometimes get stuck in between their personal medical issues and what their physician prescribes for them regarding treatment, and that may not necessarily meet FAA criteria as far as what the physician reports in their records. So I think the AME really is there to help the pilot, guide them through the minefield, so to speak, of the FAA requirements, assist that pilot in obtaining the records that are required in order to get their eligibility determined. I should also mention that the most common reason for a pilot to be denied a medical certificate is based on lacking the documentation required for the FAA to determine eligibility, rather than the medical condition itself.
So maybe that leads to probably the last question I'll ask on this show for tonight. It sounds like it's a joint venture. What can the pilot do to make it more successful?
To come prepared. To call the AME or the FAA or other agencies that can give them advice, like AOPA or ALPA if they're a union member, if they have any change in their medical condition, or if their doctor suggests certain medications. You need to know that those medications are approved by the FAA, because some aren't. Some may be medically approved by the FDA, but may have interference regarding aviation safety, cognitive functioning, and that sort of thing. So I always tell the pilots, if you have any change in your medical condition, your doctor wants to prescribe a new medication, call us first, even off the record, so that we can guide you and your physician into the type of treatment that will not restrict your medical certification.
Great. Dr. Illick, thank you for being on the program
It's my
tonight.
pleasure. Thanks, Harry.
Ladies and gentlemen, Peter's going to be back next time, and she's going to talk about some of the common but serious conditions that might lead to grounding, and also talk a little bit about ungrounding, if that's a word, getting you back on flying status. So I hope you'll tune in next time, and in the meantime, fly safe.
Thanks a lot, Harry. Here's a look at your marine forecast now for southeast. With a southeasterly flow coming up the coastal areas, we expect winds to run around 30 knots or so. You'll see seas between 8 and maybe as high as 12 feet out offshore of Craig and into the Dixon entrance. On the inner channels, you're looking at a southeasterly flow around 20 knots or so. Waves probably about 4 to 5 feet, more of a northerly flow across the Lynn Canal, and it will shift to more of a southeasterly flow as we get into Wednesday with a 25-knot wind, 5-foot seas there, 5 to 10-foot seas the farther south you go, and an onshore flow developing around Sitka. Still looking at southerlies offshore of Craig with a 12-foot sea, and southerlies coming into Yakutat and some of the northern interchannel entrances around 11 to 12 feet there on Wednesday. For south central, more of a stronger wind pattern coming across the areas outside of Resurrection Bay, across the Barren Islands and Kamishak Bay. Not quite as strong as what we were looking at late last week, but we're also talking about freezing spray as a possibility, mainly west of the Barren Islands and in the Shelikof Strait area. Those winds could reach up to 35 knots with an 8-foot sea. 12-foot seas on the east side of Kodiak, and easterlies around 10 knots on the northern parts of the Cook Inlet, with northeasterlies at 20 knots with a 4-foot sea inside Prince William Sound. Those become more of an easterly flow as we get into Wednesday, 25 knots inside and outside of Prince William Sound. Northerlies draining down the Cook Inlet and off of the Kenai Peninsula at 15 to about 20 knots or so. 9 to 10-foot seas here, and you're looking at 2 to 5-foot seas running down the Cook Inlet with a northeasterly flow at 15 knots with a 9-foot sea inside Shelikof Strait. 9-foot seas also expected on the eastern side of Kodiak Island. Across the Alaska Peninsula, 20 to 35-knot winds are expected on the north side of the peninsula. 30 to 35-knot winds there south of the peninsula with 14-foot seas outside of Chignik. As you get into Wednesday, the seas drop off just a little bit there. You're looking at 5-foot seas inside Bristol Bay, 7-foot seas north of Cold Bay with an easterly flow there at 25 knots, and more southeasterly flow coming into King Cove and Sand Point with a 13-foot sea on the north side of the Pacific Ocean. You're looking on the Aleutians now on Tuesday, more of an east and south flow coming across the far western sections from Kiska to Attu. Southeasterlies are dominant there across the southern parts of the chain. Anywhere from 10 to 18-foot seas are expected, with the highest seas mainly south of Adak, Atka, and Nikolsky. And a southerly flow there from Unalaska to Nikolsky on the north side, 25 knots with a 10 to 11-foot sea. A little bit of a pattern shift here once that first wave passes by and another one begins to set up on the south side as we get into Tuesday night and Wednesday. More of a south and southwesterly flow on the North Pacific, looking at 17 to 18-foot seas here, 7 to 9-foot seas on the north side. and southwesterly flow also dominating there from Kiska to Attu, again about 20 knots or so with an 11 to 12 foot sea. Across the west, freezing spray will remain a threat south of the ice edge, which is filling in fairly quickly around St. Lawrence Island. The latest ice information should be out here in the next few minutes there. Again, you can go to weather.gov/Anchorage/ice to get your very latest information. An easterly flow coming off the YK Delta at 35 to 45 knots will remain strong through Tuesday there with 11 to 22 foot seas. 13-foot seas coming out of the Kuskokwim Bay and southeasterlies around the Pribilofs. Those could generate seas up to 13 feet. More of an easterly flow across the Pribilofs on Wednesday, a 10-foot sea expected there, and east and northeasterly winds coming out of Norton Sound. 25 to 35 knots are expected there around Nunivak Island as well. The ice is in all the way around the northern coast there. You'll notice westerlies coming across from Point Hope and northward toward Barrow. Out toward Kaktovik, the winds are picking up there as the front is squeezing through. 35-knot winds are expected there. A brisk wind advisory is posted. Northerlies coming into Kotzebue Sound at 10 knots with a westerly flow there continuing to gradually turn to the north as we get into Wednesday. 15 to 20-knot winds coming into Point Hope and Point Lay. Otherwise, 15 to 20-knot winds come in from the north and west all the way along the coast from Barrow to Prudhoe Bay, Dead Horse, and Kaktovik. Again, some of those will remain strong as we get into Wednesday afternoon. Recapping what's going on tonight, a frontal boundary will stall out across the northern coast and very close to the northern parts of southeast. Some pockets of rain and snow are possible there. It doesn't look to be terribly widespread, but keep an eye on this part of the storm here across the western Gulf. As we head into tonight, this section will gradually reorganize, and it presents a threat for some heavy accumulating snow across parts of northern sections of southeast, including Haines and Skagway, the northern parts of the Lynn Canal, and probably up the Klondike Highway. A winter storm watch is posted for areas around Haines and Skagway and the Klondike Highway again as we get into Tuesday evening and Wednesday evening, so watch for more information there from your Juneau National Weather Service office. Stronger winds are possible across the northern Gulf, and accumulating snow may develop around Kodiak as well. For the Arctic coast, a frontal boundary swinging across the coast itself today and tonight and tomorrow will represent a chance for some stronger winds and probably some snow showers there across the eastern Beaufort Sea. One frontal boundary is dying off across the northern Bering Sea as it runs farther north into drier, more stable area. Another boundary will set up on the south side of that. Meanwhile, precipitation continues across southeast and will continue to hug the northern parts and the western sections of the Gulf. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder. We'll see you again right here tomorrow night.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
It's never too early to set expectations and goals for your child's education. The UA College Savings Plan provides opportunities that can help you reach your educational savings goals. Save in Alaska. Study anywhere. There is more information available by calling 1-888, the number 4, and then Alaska. This message sponsored by the UA College Savings Plan.